Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe, tap that like button, share with your fellow ghost hunters, and leave a chilling comment. Your support is what keeps this channel alive. It all began when I moved out of the big city and started a new job in my hometown province. I had been working in the private sector before, but my dream had always been to serve in the civil service. After many years, that dream finally came true. I finally got a job. I was thrilled not only to work as a civil servant, but also to be close to my family. However, there was one urgent problem. I had to move close to my new job. I could stay at my mom's place, but it still is too far, even though it's still within the same province. My mother stepped in, calling distant relatives to ask if there might be a vacant house I could rent, or at least stay for the time being until I find a suitable place. I didn't want to stay in a dorm or pay too much on rent, especially at the start of my new job. One relative suggested an old family house, once owned by her grandparents, long since passed away and left empty. The house was just outside of town, right beside the back fence of a Buddhist temple. The relative told me I could move in immediately, rent-free. All I had to do was take care of the place and prevent it from deteriorating further. Hearing that, my mother and I felt incredibly relieved. It seemed like luck was on my side, and everything was falling neatly into place. So, I went to see the house. It was located down a narrow lane, with only a few houses scattered here and there. Surrounded by patches of farmland and empty lots, very few houses stood nearby. The only prominent landmark was the temple. The house looked old and neglected, with tall trees and overgrown weeds everywhere. The lower floor was cement, the upper floor wood joined by a steep staircase. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms, while the ground floor was one wide hall. Overall, it wasn't too bad considering it's rent-free. The only downside is that the bathroom was not inside the house, but it's in an old rural style, and was separate from the main house, just a few steps outside. Next to the house was a yard, now covered in fallen leaves from the large tree. When I opened the door and stepped inside, I was met by thick dust and oppressive silence. I rushed to open all the windows to let air circulate. Though not easily frightened, something about this house gave me an unshakable sense of gloom. I told myself it was nothing more than just an old house, and that I'd get used to it soon enough. After cleaning and moving my belongings in, nightfall came, my very first night in the house. By day, everything had seemed fine, because the house sat at the back of the temple grounds. Cars rarely passed by. In fact, the quiet felt peaceful, exactly what I wanted. But once the sun went down, the atmosphere changed. Silence blanketed the house, the darkness pressing in from all sides. A strange unease settled over me. After dinner, I went upstairs to sleep in one of the bedrooms. I cracked open a window slightly to let the night breeze in. Exhausted from the long day of cleaning and unpacking, I quickly drifted off to sleep. I suddenly woke up, startled, with no apparent reason. When I checked my phone, it was almost 2 a.m. Everything remained completely quiet, just as before, with nothing having changed. I turned over, trying to go back to sleep, and that's when the faint scent of incense wafted into the room. Though the smell caught me by surprise, I did not think much of it, assuming monks at the temple were holding some late-night rites or rituals. I went back to sleep, completely unaware that this was the beginning of the entire series of events. After I had been living in this house for about a week, I began to get used to the surroundings. Still, the place felt far too quiet. At times, I would hear dogs barking from distant homes or the sound of leaves rustling. Those noises bothered me enough to get up and shut the windows. However, one thing began to unsettle me. Besides the incense that drifted into the house every night at the same hour, stranger still, every morning, when I went to open the front door before work, I would always find a plate of food left on the ground near the temple gate. The food varied, sometimes just plain rice, sometimes rice with curry. Even the eeriest part was that every plate of rice always had a single incense stick placed beside it. It reminded me of offerings for the dead. Though I saw it often, I avoided touching the plates and tried to ignore them, or even tried not to go near them. Still, after several days, my curiosity and unease began to grow. Whose food was that for? Certainly it wasn't for dogs or cats because they don't need incense with their meals. One afternoon, on my way back from the market, I cut through the temple courtyard and saw a skinny young man in a worn t-shirt washing a container near the pavilion. He was known around the area as a temple boy, who wasn't thought to be very bright or to have normal mental capacity. People said the monks had taken him in after he was found abandoned as a child. I had seen him several times before but never spoken to him. As I walked past, the abbot, who was sweeping the courtyard, greeted me and asked how I was finding life in the house. I told him the house was quiet and peaceful, with nothing unusual, except for one thing. I then mentioned the plates of rice with incense sticks that I kept seeing. After hearing me out, the abbot looked toward the young man and quietly called him over. The young man approached slowly, his head lowered, avoiding eye contact. The abbot asked if he had been placing the rice plates nearby. The young man only smiled and replied in a slightly slurred voice that a man and a woman at the back of the temple said they were hungry and had asked him to bring them food and incense, since no one else gave them food. I was puzzled by his explanation. At the time, I dismissed it, assuming it was just another one of his odd habits due to his own peculiar nature. But once I was back inside my house, I couldn't shake a deep, uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. That night, the smell of incense returned as strongly as before. Instead of trying to fall asleep, I lay still on my back, staring at the ceiling, bothered by the heavy scent. Slowly, I realized there was something else. The faint sound of footsteps outside, as if someone were walking slowly along the path. The sound was so soft I might have missed it had I not been listening. The dragging steps sent a chill through me, and I pulled the blanket over myself, forcing my eyes shut. The nights passed, and the smell of incense never failed to return. Then, one night, everything changed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the familiar smell of incense. I was almost used to it by then, and I tried not to pay much attention. But just as I was drifting off, I heard it again, the slow, dragging footsteps. This time, they were louder, closer, as though someone was walking right across the dirt yard near my house. I froze, straining to make sure it wasn't just the wind or an animal. The dragging steps passed directly outside my bedroom window. Fear gripped me so tightly that from that night onward, I no longer dared to open the door in the dark to go to the bathroom. Because the bathroom was outside, I had no choice but to hold it until early morning. It was a Friday night, and I had been watching TV until late. As I decided to go to sleep, I suddenly remembered that I had left an important document in my car. The time was just after 2 a.m., and the smell of incense lingered in the air. I was too scared to go outside, but I couldn't just leave the documents there. Besides, I had been holding it until the show ended, and I really needed to use the bathroom. I mustered my courage, grabbed a flashlight, and quietly walked to the bathroom outside. Once finished, I headed to my car parked beside the house. The silence was so intense that I could clearly hear the echo of my own footsteps. When I reached the car, I quickly opened the door and grabbed the documents. But as I lifted my head, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye that sent chills down my entire body. A man and a woman were crouched near the temple fence. They were both in a full squatting position, eating from plates. I immediately recognized it as the same plate of food the young temple boy had placed almost every night. The woman wore a white shirt stained with dark red, her long hair falling over her face. The man was thin and pale, wearing a sleeveless shirt, his arms covered in blistered wounds. Both of them bore injuries all over their bodies, as if they had been beaten, yet none of the marks seemed to affect them at all. They devoured the food as if they hadn't eaten for days, their hands trembling as they hurriedly shoveled rice into their mouths. I stood frozen in shock. I didn't know what to do, but it was clear this was no ordinary sight. Then suddenly, the woman stopped eating abruptly. She turned her face and stared directly at me. I was utterly terrified. Her face was ghostly pale, her eyes empty, with no pupils at all. I screamed and ran back into the house, locked the door, my hands trembling, tears streaming down my cheeks. I turned on every light in the house but continued to shake. The next morning, I went directly to the temple to see the abbot and told him everything that had happened. He simply nodded, gently, before explaining that long ago, there had been an old house behind the temple, occupied by a husband and wife. They had lived in hardship and argued constantly. One day, the husband killed his wife before ending his own life. Over time, the house became abandoned, and no one dared to live there. Eventually, the couple's relatives donated the land to the temple, which became part of the fence that stands there today. The abbot believes the spirits might still linger, and perhaps the temple boy could sense their presence, which is why he brought them food. Hearing this, I was left speechless. I clasped my hands in prayer, bowed to the abbot with trembling hands, and returned home. That afternoon, I packed my belongings and moved out of the house immediately. Since that day, I have never gone near that temple again.